The silence in that courtroom wasn't just quiet, it was haunting. You could almost hear the tension crawling across the floor. No one moved. Not Robyn, not Janelle, not even him. Everyone's eyes flipped nervously back and forth, but no one dared say a word. The only sound came from Mykelti's fingers gently tapping a crumpled paper in her lap. Her eyes stayed locked ahead, but her jaw was trembling, and clutched tight in her hand was a document the rest of the family couldn't stop glancing at, even though they didn't yet know what it was. It looked small, unimportant, like an envelope you'd mistake for junk mail, until you realized what was inside. Christine sat a few seats away from her daughter, rigid, cold, almost ghost-like. Her hands were pressed flat against her knees. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were panicked, fighting to stay still. It was like she already knew, or feared, what Mykelti was about to say. Carl, the court clerk, stood at the bench, trying to shuffle some routine papers, but even he stopped and stared as the judge looked up from the stack of folders. Then Mykelti stood. That one motion, simple, slow, made Janelle exhale as if she'd been holding her breath for minutes. Mykelti never raised her voice. She didn't need to. She held up the envelope just enough for the judge to see. Her voice, when she spoke, was low, hoarse. "This changes everything," she said. Simple, chilling, real. And suddenly every pair of eyes in that room was on her, including Christine's. But Christine didn't blink. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Her face turned pale, and she shook her head gently, as if trying to erase something that had already happened in her mind. You could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on the walls. For a second, even the man who always tries to control the room didn't say a word. His mouth was clamped shut. Robyn looked absolutely frozen, and her eyes were already glassy. She leaned slightly toward him, whispering something no one could hear, but he didn't respond. Because whatever Mykelti held, whatever truth she had cracked the floor wide open. Then came the whisper. It wasn't shouted, it wasn't acted, it was real, soft, like Christine was saying it to herself. "This isn't possible." She wasn't ready for this. No one was. Weeks earlier, none of them could have predicted this moment except maybe Christine, and the look on her face said that somewhere deep inside, she had always feared this day might come. The old secrets she worked so hard to protect were now sitting in Mykelti's shaking hands. Not on TV gossip blogs, not behind closed doors, not in therapy sessions. In court, in real life, in front of their own blood, face to face. Even Janelle, normally calm and careful, was rubbing her wrist nervously. She leaned in slightly, her eyes scanning the paper Mykelti now placed gently on the judge's table. And still, no one else spoke. They knew whatever came next wouldn't just affect Christine. It would reach through the years, into childhoods, into trust, into memory. You could sense it. A reckoning. And through all the stillness, Christine's fingers started trembling. She reached slowly for the edge of the table to steady herself, but never looked at the paper again. She was staring at Mykelti. But it wasn't anger. It wasn't shock. It was something deeper, something broken, a secret hidden so long that no words were left to protect it. Then Mykelti took a single step forward. The judge raised his hand slightly, motioning her to speak again. She stood taller, her voice steadier this time. Her eyes didn't leave her mother's face. "And I needed to know," she said gently, "because this isn't who I thought I was." Everyone's breath hitched. Even Robyn let out a small gasp. That sentence crushed everything, not because it was loud, but because it was true. Christine blinked hard, and you could almost see the moment her heart broke open. And then, right there, in front of everyone, she did it. In the beginning, Christine was the nurturing one. That's what the family always said. She was the wife who made sure birthdays were remembered down to the detail. School projects were finished on time, and dinners felt warm no matter how cold the house got. But behind that constant caretaking was a quiet kind of exhaustion that not everyone noticed. she held it all together for her children, especially in those early seasons when everything looked different on the surface, but already felt fractured underneath. Back then, Christine had 6 kids to raise, and very little support to do it. While the others juggled attention, Christine stayed grounded. The diapers, the homework, the broken furniture. She was the one holding the pieces, even if no one gave much notice. And maybe the world saw her as simply the sweet mom in the background, but inside, she was carrying the weight of a life that wasn't easy to live. From the very start, you could tell Christine's love for her children ran deep, but there were moments, subtle ones, when things didn't feel evenly shared. One child was held a little closer during tough times. Another was comforted more gently. And then there was Mykelti, observant since childhood, always sensing what the others didn't say. In family interviews, when the camera panned across the room, you could see it in her face. She wasn't quite the loudest, not the quietest either, but she was present, watching, thoughtful. Christine spoke often about how important it was that her kids felt safe. Safe in their home, in their beliefs, and in the structure of their lives. But there was a fragility behind those words, like she was trying to protect her children from something she hadn't been protected from herself. It was easy to miss if you weren't paying attention, but Mykelti was. She noticed when her mother would stiffen just slightly whenever the topic of certain seasons came up. She remembered the way Christine's mood would shift around specific family anniversaries. And she never forgot the days her mother went completely quiet. Days that had no explanation, just a sudden heaviness in the room. Looking back, it wasn't dramatic. It was delicate. The kind of emotional distance that doesn't scream. It breathes in the corner. Softly. And over the years, that small space between Christine and Mykelti slowly widened. Not through arguments or fights, but through avoidance. Subtle changes. Unspoken grief. There was one episode back then, maybe season 3 or 4, when Christine was asked if she felt equally connected to all her children. She smiled and said yes, of course. But there was a flicker in her eyes, something that didn't match the warmth in her voice. And Mykelti, sitting just off camera, glanced sideways like she heard what wasn't being said. The family moved houses. They celebrated together. They kept filming. But there were moments in between that stuck. Mykelti getting ready for prom and Christine barely saying a word. School awards handed out, and her claps felt just a second too late. Kids notice those things, especially daughters looking for a piece of their mother. And Mykelti was patient. She didn't push. She didn't question it out loud, but she held on to years of moments she couldn't explain. And somewhere deep down, they built a quiet question inside her that she could never quite let go of. Why did it always feel like her mother was holding something back? And that silence from years ago? It finally made sense. It started on a quiet afternoon. Nothing dramatic, no build-up, no warning, just a routine scroll through her phone while the twins were napping. Mykelti had been curious about family history. It was something she'd always talked about doing, but never made the time for. But now she was finally here, signed into one of those ancestry apps after a friend from church mentioned how cool it was to trace generations. She thought she'd find a cousin or two. Maybe a pioneer ancestor someone forgot to write about. That's what she was expecting. What she found instead hit like a gut punch. A name she didn't recognize popped up first. Then another. Close relatives filtered in. Some half-matches, some questionable. But one connection stood out. According to the results, there was someone listed with a genetic tie that shouldn't have existed at all. It wasn't distant. It wasn't vague. It said parent-child relation. Her heart dropped. She refreshed the page 3 times, thinking maybe it was a glitch or a duplicate account. But there it was, clear as day. She whispered, "No way," even though no one was there to hear it. She stepped away from the table, walked around the kitchen with her phone still shaking in her fingers. She clicked deeper into the profile. The face didn't look like anyone she knew. The timeline didn't make sense, and the biological markers weren't adding up. She saw something that didn't belong, a DNA connection that said everything she didn't want to believe. This wasn't a stranger. It was someone the data claimed had parental DNA links, but not matching up with the parents she actually knew. That night, she waited for Tony to get home. When he walked in, she showed him the screen, without saying a word. He held the phone for a long time, scrolling slowly. his eyebrows pulling together. He was quiet. Too quiet. "I don't get it," she finally said, almost choking on the words. "This doesn't make sense. It says I'm someone else's kid." Tony looked up, calm the way he always was. His hand stayed steady on the table, but the pause before he answered told her everything. "Are you sure this is real?" "My DNA doesn't lie, Tony." And he didn't argue. He didn't offer a theory or try to calm her nerves. He didn't suggest checking with siblings or emailing support. All he did was stare at the name on the screen. Then he set the phone down slowly and rubbed his forehead. It wasn't his reaction that scared her. It was the absence of surprise, as if he had already guessed this might happen but hoped it never would. She didn't sleep much that night. She lay awake just watching the app refresh itself over and over, hoping maybe if she closed it and opened it enough times, the screen would show something else. A system error, a message saying, "Oops, wrong results." But the name stayed there every single time. The next morning, she called her mother. Twice. Then again around lunch. No answer. By evening, Mykelti sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the light on her phone. Still no response. Her stomach hurt. Her chest felt like it was squeezing tighter with each hour that went by. Avoidance wasn't new. Her mom had dodged emotional questions before, but this wasn't small. This wasn't about feelings. This was her identity. So she texted Christine. Not long, just a few words. "I need to see you. Now." No reply. And that silence? It wasn't the kind of silence you brush off. It was the kind that confirms your worst fear. She knew she had to confront her mother. The kitchen was quiet. Too quiet for a family that had once lived in constant noise. There were no giggles from toddlers, no sounds of potatoes being peeled, no upbeat music humming from a speaker in the background. Just the soft tick of the wall clock and the stiff sound of Mykelti's boots scraping against the wood floor as she stepped inside. Christine stood by the sink, her back to the doorway, hands trembling slowly under still water. She didn't turn around when Mykelti called her name. She didn't need to. She felt it. Her daughter's presence, the weight of the moment pressing hard against her shoulders. On the counter between them sat a plain white envelope. Standard, nothing dramatic, no frills, just a simple seal and the quiet power to shake the foundation of 30 years. Mykelti didn't touch it yet. She just stared at her mother, waiting, letting the silence do what words couldn't. Christine moved first. She turned, drying her hands on the towel with such delicate slowness you'd think she was buying time like currency. Her eyes searched Mykelti's face, but her lips remained pressed into a tight line. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She just stood there, waiting to be asked something she couldn't answer without breaking. "That's the test," Mykelti finally said, nodding toward the envelope. Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't pleading either. It was heavy, controlled. Christine looked down at it like it was something radioactive. Slowly, she reached out and ran one finger along the edge of the paper. "I already know what it says," she whispered. Mykelti's heart sank. She hadn't expected that. Not the confession, not the surrender in her mother's voice. She expected resistance, maybe deflection, but not this quiet recognition. "I didn't want to believe it," Mykelti said, eyes flicking between the envelope and her mother's face. "I thought maybe it was a mix-up, or a scam." Christine nodded faintly, but her voice barely made it past her lips. "I wanted to tell you so many times," she said, blinking quickly. "But I was so afraid of what it would do to you." "You should be more afraid of what hiding it has already done to me," Mykelti said, the words sharper than she wanted them to be, but true. Her hands shook as she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the second copy of the results, printed clearly in bold black ink. She laid it on the counter next to the envelope. And there it was. The name. Not the name she expected. Not the name she had grown up believing was hers by blood. Christine looked at the paper. Her face lost what little color it had left. She lowered herself slowly into a chair, hands in her lap, eyes wide but dry, a storm beneath the skin. Everything about her posture spoke guilt. And something else, sorrow that had outlived its disguise.
"I thought silence would protect you," Christine said softly. "You were so little. There wasn't an easy way to fix it. And then the years kept going, and I convinced myself maybe it didn't matter, because love would be enough."
Mykelti didn't speak. She didn't nod or shake her head. She just stood there, absorbing the weight of her mother's regrets, her own breath starting to shake. "So who am I to you then?" she asked, voice catching in her throat. "Am I your daughter? Or someone you raised because you had to?" Christine's face collapsed into something unimaginable. She gasped but couldn't speak. Her mouth opened, but the words refused to form. You could see how much she wanted to say yes, to scream it, to make this pain stop. But honesty blurred into shame with every second. Gray light from the kitchen window hit just right, catching the tear slipping down Mykelti's cheek. And then she looked directly at her mother. And then Mykelti asked the one question Christine never wanted to answer. Christine sat in the chair like her body had given up. Her shoulders slumped forward, her hands limp in her lap, her mouth slightly open but useless. Mykelti didn't move, didn't press, didn't even blink. She waited, because the weight of the room had shifted. This wasn't about facts anymore. This was about something heavier, something sacred that had been shaken. It started with a breath, a slow, trembling inhale. Christine wiped her eyes once, then looked up at her daughter and said the words that cracked the silence in half. "You weren't put in my arms right away." Mykelti furrowed her brows, confused. She tilted her head slightly, unsure what that even meant. Christine continued, her voice catching. "When you were born, they took you. They said it was routine checks and that nothing was wrong, but they kept you longer than they were supposed to. Hours." Her chest rose and fell too fast, like the memory itself made it hard to breathe. "I asked about you again and again. They kept brushing me off, said you were in excellent health, no need to worry. But something felt off. When they finally brought you back, you were already cleaned, dressed, even swaddled, like someone else had held you. It didn't feel like mine. Not at first, but then I held you. And everything else faded because you looked like me. You smelled like my baby." Mykelti's face went pale, and her knees buckled just slightly. She reached for the counter to steady herself. "You're saying," she whispered, "you think I wasn't—" Christine's voice dropped to barely more than breath. There was a nurse, a woman I'd never seen before. She was on the floor that day, but not part of my OBGYN's team. She kept asking weird questions, like if this was our first baby, if we'd named you yet. Things she shouldn't have needed to know. But in the middle of labor, you don't question kindness. You're just desperate for relief, for answers, for someone to help. She stood now, unable to stay seated, pacing slowly, dragging her hand along the back of the couch for balance. "When they brought you back, I held you, and I told myself over and over, this is my baby. This has to be." But the nurse, the same one, she just watched. She had this look, like regret, like she knew something and couldn't say it. Mykelti's fingers tightened around the DNA report still spread on the counter. Her voice cracked. "Why didn't you ask more questions? Why didn't you push harder?" Christine turned, face red, voice rising. "Because I was scared. Because no one would have believed me. Because I was a tired mom, surrounded by people I didn't trust. And if I pushed, I would have spiraled. And I couldn't afford to spiral. Not in that family." Her words dropped, then steadied again. "I chose love, Mykelti. I chose to raise you as mine. I kissed your bruises. I made your lunches. I comforted your nightmares. Even when I didn't understand why a small part of me always wondered." Those words landed like stone, the heart of everything. That tiny sliver of uncertainty Christine had lived with in silence. The doubt she buried under routines and hugs and birthdays. But it never disappeared. Mykelti's eyes stayed locked on her mother's. "You knew." Christine shook her head. "No, I feared. I suspected. But I couldn't live in that fear, because if I was wrong, I'd have ruined everything. And if I was right, I didn't know how to fix it without breaking you." There was a beat of stillness between them, time stretching long and thin. Then Mykelti mouthed the truth without speaking it. "You didn't fight." And Christine blinked hard, voice low again. "I thought if I loved you deeply enough, fiercely enough, it wouldn't matter. That biology wouldn't mean anything. And for years, it didn't." Mykelti turned away, wiping her face fast. Her breath shook, ragged and short. "I believed I was yours." Christine stepped forward slowly, grief etched across every inch of her face. "You always were. In every way that mattered. But maybe someone made a choice that day. Maybe you were taken. Or maybe I wasn't strong enough to demand more. Either way, I should have told you sooner." That moment held them both frozen. Everything stripped bare. No performance, no escape. But that wasn't even the whole truth. The wooden bench felt cold beneath Christine's hands, even though the courtroom was warm. She sat on the left side, posture sharp, eyes focused, flanked by her lawyer and Mykelti. Her daughter hadn't let go of the envelope since they entered. Not once. Holding that piece of truth like a shield. Not for protection, but because letting go might unravel everything. Christine was composed, but not calm. Inside she was shaking. Outside, she stayed still, choosing silence with purpose. Mykelti sat close beside her, her expression unreadable. Too much had been lost to confusion and fear. Now, all that was left was to hear what certainty would do to the rest of them. Janelle appeared just before the judge walked in, slipping quietly into a seat behind them. No scene, no words, but her presence mattered. She never said much during these kinds of things, but when Janelle showed up, it always meant she believed something serious was unfolding. She offered no warm greeting, no hug, just a steady glance to Christine that said, "I'm here. This matters." On the right side, down the row, he walked in. He didn't look toward Christine, not even once. He walked stiff, robotic almost, his hand tightening briefly around the back of Robyn's elbow as they found a seat. Robyn followed, eyes wide, lips curled tight. When she caught sight of Mykelti gripping that envelope, her expression cracked. Even from across the room, Robyn's face said everything. Fear, disbelief, a flicker of guilt. She knew something, or she was afraid of what was about to surface. The judge entered. Everyone rose. A heavy wave of silence washed over the room again as the proceedings began. Formalities, names, records, then came the evidence submission. Mykelti stood, this time firm, steady in spine, and handed the envelope forward. There was a pause as the judge shifted through the enclosed details. Then a longer hesitation when he noted the anomalous report. A report that identified a biological discrepancy between Christine and Mykelti that couldn't be dismissed. The judge adjusted his glasses, quietly asked if there was any new material before he considered the motion for records investigation. Christine's lawyer stood, nodded, then came something no one expected. There is a sworn affidavit filed this morning by a former employee of Mercy Valley Medical, a nurse. The lawyer handed over the document with deliberate slowness. Christine stiffened instantly. She could feel the blood leave her hands. Even Mykelti turned, confused. The court clerk passed copies to all parties. The document was brief, but the information inside was shaking Christine to her core. This nurse had worked the maternity ward the day Mykelti was born. She recalled a woman, another nurse, breaking standard procedure, taking the child temporarily during shift change, citing paperwork inconsistencies. She stated under oath that protocols were violated, that baby identification bracelets had been mismatched, corrected later, but there had been enough chaos that mistakes may have occurred. Christine almost whispered aloud. She remembered those hours. She remembered accusing herself of being overdramatic. Postpartum, tired, the room spinning. But she always knew something had gone wrong. The judge looked up directly at Christine then. "Did you ever report any of this?" "No," Christine said softly. "I was scared. I thought maybe I imagined it." Robyn shifted in her seat, leaning toward Cody, whispering fast. He didn't respond. He kept his eyes down, detached in a way that felt brutal. Then Robyn raised her hand slightly, drawing attention. I don't know if it matters," she started, her voice warbling. The room locked in. "But years ago, I overheard a conversation between Christine and her midwife. Something about identification tags not matching at the hospital. She was crying, and I told Cody. I was worried. I thought someone should say something, but he told me not to repeat it." Christine couldn't breathe for a second. That memory, the one she had buried so deep, wasn't imagined. It wasn't postpartum fog. It was real. Someone else had known and chosen silence. And Christine turned slightly, meeting Robyn's now tear-filled eyes, because someone else knew and stayed silent for years. The judge hadn't even asked a follow-up question before the silence cracked. Robyn shifted again in her seat, this time sitting forward completely. Her arms were folded across her chest, as if she was bracing herself for impact. But it was her face, torn between shame and fear, that told Christine this moment had been years in the making, and now there was nowhere left to hide. "I didn't know what to do," Robyn said, her voice trembling hard. "I didn't want to cause more issues in the family. Christine was already distant. Things were hard. I didn't want to make it worse." She kept talking, louder now, like the admission had been building behind her ribs for years. "I overheard her talking about the hospital, about something being off. I thought maybe it was just emotions from the birth, but then I saw the files on the counter a few weeks later. Something to do with DNA swabs. I told Cody. I thought he should know." She turned toward the bench beside her, eyes wide, hoping for acknowledgement from him. But he stayed still, staring forward like nothing was happening. That silence felt sharper than anything she could have said. "I told him I thought Christine was dealing with something serious, that maybe something had happened at the hospital, and he told me—" Her voice broke, just for a second. "He told me to let it go, that Christine always overreacts, that everything would blow over." Christine was standing before Robyn even finished. She couldn't sit still anymore. The words had ripped open something that had been stitched shut for decades. Her hands were trembling, her voice clawing its way out. Mykelti rose slightly too, but her eyes stayed locked on her mother, because she saw it. The shift. This wasn't grief anymore. This was rage. "You knew?" Christine said, barely louder than a whisper. Her voice cracked, but her eyes didn't blink. "You knew something was wrong, and you kept it to yourself?" Robyn's lips parted, but nothing came. "And you!" Christine turned toward him now, her voice rising, pointing across the courtroom. "You dismissed it? Like it wasn't worth talking about? Like I was the problem?" Still, no answer, no words, not even a shake of the head. Just quiet. Christine could feel her heart pounding so loud she thought the room could hear it. She turned back to face Robyn, and her body finally gave way. The sob tore through her like lightning, but it didn't collapse her. It fired her up. "All those years!" she shouted now, the tears finally catching her voice. "All those years! I looked at my daughter and wondered if I was crazy. I begged myself to stop obsessing. I thought I was broken." She stepped closer. The courtroom didn't dare interrupt. "You sat in my living room. You ate my food. You watched my children grow. And all the while you held this secret. You let me drown in self-doubt when you could have said something. Anything!" Robyn was crying now, burying her face in her hands, trying to speak but sputtering instead. Her mascara ran down her cheeks as she shook her head over and over like denial could change the past. But Christine wasn't finished. "I may not have had power in that family, but I sure as hell deserved the truth. My daughter deserved the truth!" The courtroom had no air left. You could feel the walls closing in. Christine stepped back, breathing deep and fast, chest heaving, hands clenched into fists. For a second, you could still see the pain layered on her face. But then, it changed. The hurt stayed, sure, but something else took over. Something colder, something fire-hot behind the eyes. Christine wasn't crying anymore. She was furious. The hallway outside the courtroom was silent, except for the faint hum of an overhead light and the low sound of a vending machine rattling in the distance. Everyone else had cleared out, scattered in different directions after the hearing, but Christine stood just a few feet from the exit door, her back against the wall like she needed it to hold her up. Her eyes were glassy, staring at the floor, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. Not in fear, not in defense, but in resolve. Footsteps approached slowly and deliberately. Christine didn't need to look up to know who it was. Janelle stopped in front of her and said nothing at first. She leaned slightly against the wall just beside her, folding her arms too, waiting for a beat to pass. The silence between them had always been different. Never aggressive, never sharp, just quiet, layered with shared exhaustion and too many unspoken truths. "She didn't mean for you to carry this alone," Janelle said finally. Her voice was low, calm, certain. Christine blinked slowly. "But I did. For decades." "I know," Janelle said, "but you're not the only one who's been lied to." That sentence landed heavier than Christine expected. She turned, eyes narrowing a little, uncertain what Janelle really meant, but Janelle didn't flinch. "There were things," she continued, "things I used to think were misunderstandings, moments that felt off." She paused, then looked at Christine more directly. But the problem in that house wasn't confusion. It was manipulation, and we all survived it differently. Christine tilted her head, listening closely now. "I wanted to believe in the bigger picture," Janelle said. "For my kids, for the structure, for what we committed to. But every time one of us cracked, they called it drama. Every emotion was overreacting. Every instinct dismissed. Doesn't matter if it was about a baby being switched or just feeling like less of a wife." Christine shook her head, her voice hoarse. "And we stayed. We stayed and convinced ourselves that loyalty meant love." Janelle didn't argue. She let that regret hang in the air. Christine stepped forward, needing space from the wall now, her voice firmer with each breath. "I gave my whole life to that family. I raised children in a system that asked me to shrink every time I questioned anything. And now I find out I didn't even fully know my own child." "All of us were told to keep quiet when things didn't feel right," Janelle said. "But what if this DNA test is just the start? What else don't we know?" Christine didn't speak for a moment. She stared ahead, but her mind was racing. Through birthdays, misappointments, silent dinners, the moments she journaled alone late at night because she felt like no one actually saw her. And now that the pieces were tumbling, she couldn't stop them. Looking back, every bit of silence, every minimized concern, every moment she put her children second to someone else's decisions, it all meant something different now. Because this wasn't just about a hospital mix-up. It was about trust, betrayal, power. It was about family ties that had been stretched so thin, a single truth was enough to rip them apart. And still, even through it all, Christine wasn't falling apart. Her strength didn't look like a breakdown. It looked like clarity, like stepping out of something that never fit, like standing taller in the shadow of truth. Janelle turned then, laying a hand briefly on Christine's arm before walking away without another word. It wasn't goodbye. It didn't need to be. It was recognition, support in its rawest form. No performance, no false hope, just acknowledgement of two women who had been lied to for too long. Christine stood alone now, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't doubting herself. Because strength, real strength, had nothing to do with silence. It came from standing in the center of the storm and facing it anyway. And in that moment, For the first time in years, Christine felt free. It wasn't just a reveal, it was a reckoning. The name had been sitting at the bottom of the DNA report, like a thread Christine was too afraid to pull. It wasn't someone she recognized. Not from any baby books, church gatherings, or even distant relatives. Just a stranger. A woman whose genetic link to Mykelti was labeled with one word that still didn't feel real. Mother. Christine had stared at that name for days. She reread it like it might reorganize itself into a mistake, but it never did. When she finally picked up the phone, her hands were ice cold. Her voice shook as she left the message. I believe you may have a connection to my daughter. I don't have answers, but I'm ready to talk. 2 days later, they met in a quiet park in northern Arizona, neutral ground. The trees had already dropped most of their leaves, and the early chill in the air made Christine pull her coat tighter across her frame. She waited under a maple tree near a bench, watching the parking lot for movement. Then she saw her. The woman walked slowly, her steps uncertain. Her face wasn't angry or emotional, but you could tell she was holding something deep. She looked ordinary, a plain sweater, jeans, a braid thrown over her shoulder. But what struck Christine wasn't how she looked. It was how much her face resembled Mykelti's when she was a baby. The same cheek structure, the same doe-like eyes. It was disorienting, and in a strange way, heartbreaking. They didn't greet with a handshake. There was too much emotion for that. The woman sat beside Christine on the wooden bench quietly, folding her hands in her lap. For a good moment or two, neither of them said anything. Just shared the space, knowing exactly why they were there, but terrified to start. I didn't give up, the woman said first, her voice thin and dry. I searched for years, but no one believed me either. Christine swallowed hard. What happened? She nodded slowly, looking straight ahead. I gave birth right down the hall from you. Same date. I remember the nurse. She seemed nice, but distracted. Just like my baby, you were taken for checks. And when they brought her back... She paused. I knew something was wrong. Did you say something? 3 times, she replied sharply. They told me I was being emotional, that first-time moms get overwhelmed. But I remembered the ID tag on her foot being different. Then magically it was corrected a few hours later. My family told me to drop it. Christine looked down at her hands, the guilt rising in her throat like a wave she couldn't stop. I didn't fight either, she whispered. I blamed myself. Thought if I loved her enough, the doubt would disappear. The woman turned now, looking directly at Christine. Her face didn't accuse. It didn't rage. It broke. I lost a daughter and never got her back. I raised another. I love her to death. She's still mine in every way. But part of me never stopped wondering where my baby ended up. Christine blinked, not fighting back tears this time. I raised your child like she was mine, and she is mine. But she wasn't supposed to be yours. The woman finished for her. Not like that. There was no reunion moment, no music swelling, no warm embrace. Just 2 mothers, both robbed of something sacred. Time, truth, certainty. Each had raised someone meant for the other. Each had carried the questions in silence for a lifetime. Christine stood up slowly, nodding in gratitude but unable to find the right words. Some pain didn't need language. As she walked back to her car, Christine didn't feel closure. She felt the absence, the years gone, the pieces of Mykelti's history she could never give back. Love wasn't the question. She had loved her daughter fully, and still did. But now, she finally understood. Christine realizes what was really taken from them both. Christine sat alone in her bedroom the night before the final hearing, surrounded by old photo albums, pages creased and warm with decades of hands and memories. Mykelti's baby picture lay in the center of the quilt on her bed. Soft curls, wide eyes, a crooked smile missing a tooth. She stared at it for a long time, realizing she'd memorized this face long before she questioned anything. For years, she believed that loving her children enough would erase all doubt, that the way she stayed up through countless sleepless nights, the scraped knees she kissed, the prayers she whispered at bedtime, that it all proved who she was. And in some ways, it still did. But something had shifted. Not just in the facts, not just in what the tests revealed, but in the silence she finally chose to break. That silence had cost her something she didn't know she was gambling with. Time. Trust. A daughter's sense of place. Down the hall, Mykelti sat curled on her couch, one hand on her phone, the other flipping through the DNA results yet again. She kept going back to the same name, over and over, like staring long enough might make the printing fade, as if part of her hoped this was all still some kind of strange mistake. But it wasn't. And this wasn't a chapter she could close. This was a book she never knew she was in. She hadn't spoken much the last few days. Her energy felt caught between what she knew and what she felt, between the mother who raised her and the truth of someone else she now, somehow, belonged to. That kind of pain wasn't simple. It wasn't loud either. It was quiet, like a low hum behind every breath she took. When they stepped into the courtroom again, it felt colder. Fewer people were there this time. Janelle came back and sat silently behind them. Robyn was already seated, neck tense, eyes low. She didn't look toward Christine once, not even when the judge walked in. Cody wasn't there. He hadn't shown. Not for the final testimony, not for Mykelti, not for the truth. Christine's lawyer handed her a folder and nodded softly before standing aside. The judge asked if she had anything she wanted to say for the record. Christine stood, steady, shoulders back, her hands no longer trembling. She looked out at the nearly empty room, at her daughter beside her, grown now but still needing honesty more than anything. She could feel Janelle's steady presence behind her like a quiet promise, and Robyn's stillness like a wall too thick to move. "I don't know if I'll ever fully make peace with what happened," Christine said, voice calm but heavy. "There are years I can't get back. Birthdays, bonding, the truth we missed. And that's no one's fault, but it is everyone's responsibility." She paused, letting the words settle. "I was 28 when she was born. Tired, unequipped, but desperate to do it right. I mistrusted myself when I should have raised hell. And that mistake, it cost us all." Mykelti lowered her gaze. One tear fell. Nothing else moved. "I didn't stay silent out of evil. I stayed silent out of fear. Fear of breaking the family. Fear of being told I wasn't stable. Fear that people I trusted didn't trust me back." Christine's eyes scanned the room, finally resting on Robyn. Robyn didn't look up. She couldn't. When someone tells you something feels wrong, believe them. Especially mothers. We feel it in our bones. And when we push those feelings down, we raise children in houses built on cracks. She reached down and gently took Mykelti's hand. "This is my daughter. That never changed. That never will. But the truth matters, even when it hurts. Especially then. Because truth is the only thing that doesn't need backup. It just needs space to breathe." The judge nodded once, then called for closing. Christine and Mykelti walked out side by side, slow, feet echoing softly through the hallway. No words between them. They didn't need them right now. They'd said the part that mattered. Outside, the winter air was sharp and clear. Christine looked up briefly at the sky and exhaled as if she was letting go of something she'd been carrying too long. Not the truth, not the love, the silence. And in that release, something in Mykelti shifted too. Not fixed all at once, but no longer buried. The story didn't end here. It couldn't. But it finally started to make sense. Now, let me ask you something. What would you do if a secret like this was uncovered in your family? Would you stay silent to protect the ones you love? Or speak up, even if it shattered everything? Tell me in the comments. Your truth matters more than you know.